Okay, welcome to our 2025-26 kickoff session of ARCS Forward. As has been our tradition for the past 5 years, we always begin the year with a special ARCS Forward Hall of Fame session where we feature our latest Hall of Fame inductee. This is the 10th anniversary of our ARCS Alumni Hall of Fame, and since the inception of ARCS, our scholars have been at the heart of everything we do. We provide support, encouragement, and funds at a time when they are just beginning to launch their careers. 10 years ago, Nancy Chambers had the idea to take a look back and to see what some of our alumni were up to and to reconnect with them and to try to sort out who are the best and brightest among all these amazing scholars that we've funded over the years and to create a Hall of Fame that we could induct a person into each year to really recognize the strength of their career and their work and the impact of it. So we continue that tradition. And if you look at on our website at our Hall of Fame members, there's 16 of them. The impact is incredible. It's really something to behold. So we're excited every year to see who will be added to that illustrious group. And this year, we welcome Dr. Anurag Agrawal to our Alumni Hall of Fame. Dr. Agrawal is a highly regarded evolutionary biologist at Cornell University, coming to us today from Ithaca, New York. And he was an ARCS Scholar in 1998, and he was funded by the Northern California chapter. ARCS Foundation has a 67-year history of advancing science in the United States by providing financial awards to academically outstanding U.S. citizens who are studying to complete degrees in STEM. We are a leader in scientific philanthropy, and we've always stood strong with science, and now more than ever, that is critical. I really want to thank you for joining us and for your support of ARCS Foundation. I really love these sessions because, well, it's impressive and it's one thing to read about what our Hall of Fame inductees have done. It's even better to hear from them and to be able to talk with them about what they've done and have a chance to ask questions. Questions will be taken at the end. Please put any questions you have into the chat and we will sift through them and hopefully answer as many as we can. I also want to introduce our moderator, Ellie Nesbitt. Ellie is a longtime Metro Washington chapter member, and she serves on the national board as the past chair of the Council of Presidents. Ellie is also co-chair of the ARCS Alumni Hall of Fame Committee, and along with Pam Meadowcroft. And Ellie wears a lot of hats and does so much for ARCS Foundation, so I really want to thank her for doing this today. She's a frequent contributor to ARCS Forward. I think this is the third time she's moderated for me, and I'm delighted to welcome her back. Ellie, thank you. Take it away.
Well, thank you, Jill. And Dr. Agrawal, thank you for joining us today for the ARCS Forward session. I'm going to share your bio with our audience. I got it from your Cornell website, so if anything you want to change, just let me know. But Dr. Agrawal is an evolutionary ecologist working on diverse species interactions, particularly chemically mediated coevolution between plants and their herbivorous insect pests. He uses natural history, field experiments, genetics, and comparative biology to test fundamental theories, as well as improve environmental and agricultural sustainability. Most recently, he has focused on monarch butterflies and their milkweed hosts. Dr. Agrawal earned a BA in biology and MA in conservation biology from the University of Pennsylvania and a PhD in population biology from the University of California, Davis in 1999. Dr. Agrawal has received the Young Investigator and E.O. Wilson Awards from the American Society of Naturalists, the George Mercer and R.H. MacArthur Awards from the Ecological Society of America, Founders Memorial Award from the Entomological Society of America, the Silverstein-Simeon Award from the International Society of Chemical Ecology, and the David Starr Jordan Prize. He is a fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science and was elected to the National Academy of Sciences in 2021. Dr. Agrawal was an ARCS Scholar in 1998 from the Northern California chapter when he was a PhD candidate at the University of California at Davis. And Dr. Agrawal, could I please call you Anurag?
Definitely.
Thank you. I've read up a little on your research and watched some of your lectures, and I think your research on monarch butterflies and their adversarial relationship with their milkweed hosts and co-evolvement It's fascinating. In addition to better understanding and supporting monarchs, your research is also very important for the insights it provides for other species. Could you please provide a few highlights for our guests about your research and the way it can also be extrapolated to other species, maybe the spotted lanternflies and maybe also humans?
Definitely. Well, where to start? I mean, I guess the thing I would say is, as a biologist, the curse and the blessing of being a biologist is there's a lot of biodiversity. The scientists have named 2 million species on the planet, and there are probably about 10 million species. Most of them are small and rare, so we haven't put names on them yet. And so one of the big challenges for us, and I would say this is different from the physical sciences, chemistry, physics, is that we want to believe that there are rules in biology, but at some extreme level, each species is a rule unto itself. And I promise I'm going to circle back around to your question. So one of the things that we've done by focusing on monarchs and milkweed is said, well, they're an iconic and extreme and beautiful and interesting species pair. To what extent are they representative of biodiversity? And I think in many ways they are, and in some ways they're not. But we've kind of used it as a case study. And you might ask the question, okay, is it a good system as a case study? And the reason we think it's a pretty good system is in that sphere of 2 million described species, about a quarter are plants. And another quarter of all biodiversity are the insects that eat plants. And the reason, most people don't think of kind of plants and plant interactions with insects as being the basis for most of the biodiversity around us. Perhaps you're more interested in what I sometimes call the charismatic megafauna, the lions, tigers, and eagles or whatever. But ultimately, those organisms, whatever they are, get their energy moving up the food chain from plants to the bugs that eat them, to the birds that eat the bugs. And so we've kind of made the argument, well, to ourselves and then to other scientists and occasionally to funding agencies that studying something like the monarch-milkweed interaction is not only relevant to understanding that system, but to the many, many plant-insect interactions that are out there, and that those are the important food, if nothing else, for then the rest of biodiversity. So I would say we've taken kind of over the last couple of decades, a mixture of approaches. On the one hand, I sometimes, am most excited about watching caterpillars eat and the goo that the milkweed, the milk that the latex that exudes from the plants as the caterpillar is trying to feed on it, the chemical toxins that are in the plants to ward off being eaten, but the monarchs have their adaptations and they take advantage of some of those chemicals. That's what we call coevolution, like you said, the adversarial relationship back and forth. But in other realms, we've been interested in the decline of the monarch butterfly. It's perhaps the world's best known insect. My colleague sometimes refers to it as the Bambi of the insect world. And their populations over the last 30 years have been basically incrementally declining. And there's debate about whether there's extinction risk and all of that, and we don't have to get into that at the moment. But I'd say less from an evolutionary biology perspective, but more from a conservation perspective and understanding the causes of declines of species. They've become a model for us in that regard. So there we're taking more of a population approach to understanding their biology.
And I think you said that the milkweed is the only food for the monarch?
Yeah, well, that's an interesting point. That's correct. However, in North America, there are 130 species of milkweed in that one genus we call Asclepias. So, on the eastern seaboard, Ohio, New York, New Jersey, and going south, the common milkweed, what people call Asclepias syriaca, is the main or dominant single species. And then in the west, there are several species. The monarchs can eat all of them, but milkweed is not one thing. As it goes, it's 130 things in North America. Yeah.
So one of the things that might be affecting it too, I guess, would be if people try to remove milkweed or put other things in its place as people clear the land or they urbanize or.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and that's been the subject of a fair bit of debate in the scientific community, in the sense that on first principles, just what you said, if they have a very strong reliance on milkweed, if there's less milkweed, there's probably going to be less monarchs. And with the agriculturalization of certainly the core Midwest areas, but really all around the world, there's certainly the potential for there to be less host plant. Then come in the whole cast of other characters, whether it's environmental pollutants, habitat fragmentation. So in other words, even if there's enough milkweed, if there are highways and malls and developments that fragment or that chop up the usable habitat, that can become a problem. Pesticide use, of course. One of the things we're learning these days is that insecticides are targeting insects, and that makes good sense that they could be a problem. But fungicides and chemicals that are applied to agricultural fields to control other things may still be harmful to particular organisms that we are interested in conserving, whether it's pollinators or butterflies or other things. So, one of my messages, I suppose, is that ecology is complicated, and so there's a lot to do, I suppose.
Okay, well, thank you. Now you've raised some very interesting points, and I think that general point that you make is that you want to focus on a larger ecosystem and the ultimate effects rather than necessarily on just one species, although the species is important too, of course.
Well, that's a very important. I'll just say very quickly. The Endangered Species Act, which was put into place under Richard Nixon's administration in 1973, is perhaps one of the world's greatest pieces of environmental legislation, and its focus is on picking individual species that may be declining, but the action it requests is to not just save that species, but to preserve functioning ecosystems that species might live in. And I think that was one of the really brilliant things that's part of the Endangered Species Act, is that on the one hand, we choose species, but we try to fix where they live, not just put them in a freezer or have them in a colony or even,
Okay, thank you very much.
Sure.
Next question, please. How did the Unrestricted ARCS Award help you when you were a PhD candidate?
Well, that's a great question. It was 1998, like you mentioned, and in my discipline of ecology and evolutionary biology, I'd say all disciplines have slightly different cultures in terms of how we train students and things. There tends to be a path of graduate students, say, taking a little bit longer. It's typically 5 or 6 years, but there's also perhaps a little bit more independence in the research that graduate students conduct. And by independence, I mean from their PhD advisor or their mentoring committee, than there is in some other disciplines. And I don't think it's good or bad, or it's just it just is what it is. That my perception is that in molecular biology, for various reasons, graduate students may be slightly less independent. So at the time when I was a student, trying to pursue some of these interesting different avenues, a mentor once told me, if your advisor doesn't think something is a good idea, but you really think it's a good idea, give it a chance on the side. Spend a few months on that problem. And the ARCS Foundation support is really what allowed me to do that. We had some ideas at the time that organisms, be them plants or animals, if they are threatened by a predator, they may, of course, their own physiology changes, but they may produce offspring, give rise to babies that might be slightly better prepared to deal with predators. And at the time, that was a very new idea. Some people thought it was a little crazy in the sense that it reminded them of Lamarckianism, which had been kind of dismissed. Lamarck was a biologist of Darwin's day that thought that the way inheritance worked is if you pumped a lot of iron, got big and strong, then you'd give rise to strong offspring. And that if you cut off a mouse's tail, maybe it would give birth to a baby mouse without a tail. We all know that biology doesn't work that way. But we still were interested in the idea that if a plant was growing and flowering and a caterpillar was feeding on it, or an animal was swimming in the water and a predatory fish came and threatened it or tried to eat it, that its own physiology might change in a way, and it might endow its yet to be born offspring with some tactics that it may improve. And that was, like I said, a kind of a crazy idea, and I used the ARCS Foundation funding to work with an undergraduate student to conduct experiments. And I would say, well, I don't want to be immodest, but I'd say that was the beginning of a small revolution in biology, where people call it now
Wonderful.
epigenetics, which is not changes in the sequences of our DNA, but changes in the expression. And parents, and particularly mothers, animals or plants, can change the gene expression not only of their own, but of their unborn offspring. And so that's blossomed into a relatively large area of research that, as a graduate student, if you have some additional funding to go after a crazy idea, you do it. And if you don't, then you don't.
Well, I'm glad it worked out. Was your advisor surprised?
He was surprised. And as is a tradition in ecology, when we went to publish the paper, he did not request that his name be on that paper.
Oh.
And he said, well, this was your independent work, and it didn't, he didn't have much contribution. He read drafts of the manuscript and edited them as a good advisor does, but I can't remember exactly, but he did a very generous thing, which is probably deleted his name from the author list. As a student, you sort of expect that your PhD advisor will be a co-author. And it wasn't, that was his generosity in terms of saying, you did this independently, you should have the credit for it. Or
It is phenomenal. I have a chemistry undergraduate and chemical engineering master's, and so I really appreciate that part of his generosity.
Yeah.
Well, since it sounds as if the ARCS Award really helped spur that that line of research and really put you on the map in that regard, what's happening now? We understand that there are reductions in federal funding for research, and we realize that it could really have an impact on schools, on the research programs, and particularly on our scholars. Can you discuss a little bit how it's affecting your lab, perhaps, and or in general?
Absolutely. I would say, on the one hand, I'm very fortunate to be at Cornell University, to be, I'll call myself mid-career. I'd say the biggest thing it's done at the moment is injected a massive amount of uncertainty at all levels of higher education. And by all levels, I mean whether it's undergraduates or graduates applying to programs. They don't know whether there'll be, what the admissions process will be like, whether there'll be spaces. From the professorial level, where the level that I'm at, I applied for 2 grants in January, and one of them was declined, which is not, that's typical. I don't have a sense. Is that declined because of lack of funding from the National Science Foundation, or it scored pretty well? The other grant proposal is still in limbo, and meaning it could be funded, it may not be. When I talk to the program officers at the National Institutes of Health, they say, we'll try to let you know by October 26th for a proposal that was submitted in January 25. So, and I think they are doing the absolute best they can. The employees at the National Science Foundation, they are, remarkable people in the sense that they are the facilitators of the research that we like to do or that we like to talk about. And I think they are remarkably frustrated and don't know what the future will hold on a sort of month to 6 month basis. And that's true for the university administrators, for the dean. Often when we have a meeting with the dean says, we just don't know. So one of the things that's led to is a lot of cuts, some of which are necessary, some of which are precautionary. The number of students we're admitting, graduate students, has declined. I would say one of the things that hurts a little bit is sometimes when you hear in the news or other places that there's a lot of waste, in the research or academic sphere.
Yeah.
And I would say the reason it hurts is most of the, researchers I know, professors, principal investigators at the university, we are typically quite conservative with our research funding. We are, answering emails on the weekend and grading papers, in the evenings, and working pretty hard for something that we believe in, the educational system or the research mission. So, it's okay. We don't have bagels before the weekly lectures anymore, and that, that we can survive that. But I would say it does do something. The uncertainty, I think, causes many people a level of stress that to me is a little bit reminiscent of the first year of COVID, in the sense that even if in our research group or family we're doing okay for this week or this month, it's a bit of a cloud that hangs over us. That's not actually the financial cut, that's just living with the uncertainty itself.
Right.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I could babble on, but
No, you're welcome to babble on. You're not babbling at all, but just use your words. But I had another question to build on that, which you may be heading in that direction. You mentor many students. You have 2 children of your own, I believe.
Yeah.
What would you say to your students, to your children, if they come to you and say, should we become PhDs?
Yes. Well, that's an interesting question. I mean, I would say my view on the short term is, absolutely yes. We need people that are going to be deep scholars in all areas. It's what's made, I'd say it's one of the factors that's made our country a world leader is scholarship. And I'd use that term very broadly in terms of there's the very practical, the engineering, which is sort of production, creative production of widgets that are used in industry. And then there's everything from that to English literature and poetry and everything in between. And I would say, I don't think it's hyperbole to say that American science and scholarship and education has been the envy of the world for several decades, especially post-World War II. And, that's something I'm very proud of. It's something that We have a cadre of international undergraduate and graduate students, and especially in a little town like Ithaca, that brings a diversity of people, of languages, of cultures, of ideas, which is sort of enriching.
Mhm.
But beyond that, I'd say like one of the things about the international draw is we're getting, some of the absolute top scholars in the world to come discuss whatever topics and to work on whatever topics we're working on. And that is, a really an amazing privilege. So I would say, I can't even remember what the question is, but
Well, what would you advise students?
yeah. So I guess I would say, in the short term, yes, absolutely, we need you, and maybe our numbers of graduate students that we're accepting is a bit lower. The job market may not be as strong, but I would say even the medium term future, and by that I mean 5 to 20 years, it's
Mhm.
complete. I think it could go really either way. It could be a little bit like, well, I don't know, COVID in some people's minds is like this and not, but it could be that we barely remember it 10 years from now. It could be that kind of blip, or we could really be on a different trajectory where universities are closing and shrinking.
Mhm.
And I would say it's a little unclear to me which way that's going to go. In the very short term, there will be, many, if not the full number of PhD positions and research positions there, but it will be a bit tougher. But I
Mhm.
would say, I guess I'd like to be a little bit hopeful that 5 years from now we'll be coming out of this, and 15 years from now we will barely remember it.
I like that viewpoint. Thank you. And you probably know, of course, how ARCS got founded. The three ladies after Sputnik, who spoke to the then president of Caltech, I believe it was,
Yes.
and asked how they could get involved. And so our mission is to enhance innovation and technology and the like to help scholars meet their potential in enhancing innovation and the like. What would you suggest to us about ways that we could improve it? Now, we've done a number of things. We've spoken with our university partners. We've spoken with our scholars, trying to offer as much assistance as we can. Um, We've also come up with a new tagline that ARC stands strong with science.
Hmm.
And we have materials, swag we can share with you if you like about that. But what would your recommendations be?
I guess I'd have three, and and I think you're already doing a bunch of this. I think that standing strong with science is an important tagline and phrase, in part because I do think that lobbying, and I use that in the most general sense, or raising awareness, let's say, is of profound importance in the sense that, at least from a perspective of biologists, there's no question about the role that vaccines have played in the betterment and the improvement of human health.
Hmm.
But if there's still question about that, then advocacy for the importance of science seems like it's really important. So I'd say the tagline speaks to that,
Hmm.
and something that I guess the ARCS community writ large can continue to do in various ways. I was part of a little bit of there was a campaign at Cornell called the Barbara McClintock Letters, and groups of people wrote letters to the editor, not to the New York Times or the Washington Post, probably because we wouldn't have gotten published there anyways, but to our smaller hometown newspapers. I'm from Allentown, PA, is where I was born. And so I wrote a letter to the editor about the importance of science and science funding
Good.
to that community. And I said, I'm proud to be part of this community. these are some of the problems growing up. There was flooding, there were sinkholes, there was there was coal burning, and I offered what I think how the scientific community has made progress in addressing those issues. So my first thing is just getting the word out beyond the scholars, but sort of the second thing I'd say is continuing to support the scholars the way that you all do. The third, I guess I'm going to say this off the cuff, and maybe we should talk about it a little bit because I'm not sure how strongly I believe in it. But for the really creative stuff to happen in scholarship, it often doesn't happen by by somebody sitting behind a desk and sort of saying, okay, I'm going to solve this problem today, and I'm going to start working on equations or whatever it is, and at some endpoint it be done. One of the, and I think this is an area in which American science has really led over the last 50 years. One of the things that generates creativity and allows for innovation is the exchange of ideas with some amount of what I'll call lubrication. So each week in my department, and Cornell has, I don't know, 50, hundreds of departments, we typically invite an external speaker. So somebody might come in on a train or a car or a plane and spend 2 days with our department. 80 people will listen to them give a lecture. We'll then have one-on-one meetings with them. And we do that for the exchange of ideas. And it's pretty interesting because for any one of those lectures or visitors, it's very difficult to predict from my perspective whether that's going to be beneficial to my project or not. And so one of the things that happens is that people start picking it within the academic community. You might pick and choose. You say, I'm not going to go to the lecture this week. I'll go next week when it's more relevant to my work. But then you go to the one that's relevant to your work and it's like it was boring, or the person wasn't a good speaker, or you already knew all of that stuff. And then a level down, when we see each other in the hallways, we can stop and have a chat, or we can run back to our offices and try to work on solving the problem. And in my experience, devoting some fraction of our time and our budget, and by budget, I'm talking about 1%. I'm not talking about, and for our time, it might be 10%, to activities in the research arena that aren't, we can't know of a particular problem I'm going to solve with that 10% of my time or that 1% of my budget, typically pays tremendous dividends over a longer period of time, whether that's 1 year or 5 years for the project. And it's typically unpredictable. So I feel like I'm talking around and around, but the third thing I would say is, in terms of what ARCS can do, is to continue to encourage some element of creative discourse that isn't just solving the problem that's right in front of us at the moment. Because I think that that's where some of the big innovations come from. Sometimes I have a scientific problem that I don't know how to solve, and I'll walk up and down the hallways of my building looking to see who will listen to sort of say, how do I get this chemical compound into solution? It doesn't want to go into solution, but I can't use alcohol to get it into solution because I want to feed it to a caterpillar and the caterpillars. And the last time that happened, it was a bird biologist on the floor down from me that sort of said, have you tried blah, blah, blah? And I hadn't. And it was so,
a collaborative event or network, because what you're referring to is not necessarily serendipity, but it's taking the best of what you're hearing and applying it and saying, whoa, eureka.
Exactly. And the last thing I'll say about this, and this relates a little bit to just the overall budget cuts, is it makes sense not to have the bagels before the lecture if the budgets are so tight. But if that was 0.1% of our budget going to those kinds of things, and it gets people to spend half an hour extra before the lecture and 20 minutes after talking to each other, I would say that's to me what it means to be a scholar, is to exchange ideas and to come up with solutions that we couldn't think of on our own. And in the really constrained world, we tend to kind of not do that as much. And,
Well, I appreciate the ideas because we are trying to head in that direction. We do have a very strong focus on our existing scholars, but also our scholar alums. And I believe that we're also attending conferences and the like to chat with them and discuss their research with them and the like. We're attending the conferences, we're not sponsoring them,
yeah,
but perhaps more meetings like that, seminars and the like, would be a way to help move that along too.
yeah,
But we have more questions coming in.
perfect.
What's the philosophy of dealing with non-native invasive species like the lanternfly and the stink bug? To eliminate them, or are there other ways to address them?
Great question. I've started some research on the lanternfly in part because it's a similar character as the monarch butterfly. It's red and black and it's sequestering poisons from its foods. I would say as a nation, we have some protections in place to try to reduce the number of invasive species that come in. One of the classic ways in which many invasive species came to our lakes and our ponds, to our waterways, is through ballast water in ships, and that's something that through regulation at the governmental level, things can be put into place to just try to reduce the number that are coming in. So I won't address that further, but I'd say that there are basically, at the federal level, legislation that can be put into place that doesn't eradicate or not eradicate, just reduces the number that are coming and filter the ballast water. Don't take ballast water from, Lake Baikal in Siberia and put it into the Great Lakes. I mean, that's just a terrible practice, right? Once invasive species are here, I think in my experience, eradication doesn't typically work. And the reason it doesn't typically work is by the time that scientists are beginning to notice something like the lanternfly, I don't remember the exact date, but the spotted lanternfly and the marmorated stink bug, they were probably introduced 60 to 80 years ago. And a very typical pattern for invasive species is that they spend their first 50 years in a new place, just kind of bumbling along at a very low level. And we actually don't know what happens, but often after 50 to 80 years is when you see that exponential growth, like we're seeing with the lanternfly right now. By that point, there are a lot of lanternflies in eastern North America. And so like Pennsylvania was one of the early states that really got on it. And as they began to move north to New York, we really are on it now. But eradication is basically not an option at this point for a species like that, or the marmorated stink bug. So then the question is adapting and mitigating the damage that they're going to do over some period of time. Many of our invasive species, eventually something gets them. In other words, whether it's a pathogen or a disease. I'm sure there's places in the East where purple loosestrife or garlic mustard are still really bad invaders. But where in central New York, where I live, those went from 20 years ago from being pests that we were really worried about to kind of finding their place in the landscape and being a little less invasive. So to me, for many of the invasive species, I work on the hemlock woolly adelgid right now, which is killing hemlocks. The question is really about the 20 to 50 year period once they've become established and they're starting to grow exponentially, what can we do to kind of keep them from really killing off 60% of the hemlocks, in the case of the hemlock woolly adelgid? And for many invasive species, if we're able to survive that, that 20 to 50 year period, they will often kind of move to the background. They're going to be present. They're going to be killing some trees. And that's what we call naturalized.
Like kudzu.
Is
Kudzu
kudzu,
in Virginia is really taking over a lot.
it's taking over a lot, yeah. So yeah, the hope is, but I guess eradication to me is not typically a worthwhile effort, because the attempts at eradication are so costly and they're so rarely effective.
And by then they're dug in, literally.
Yes. But management, I mean, one of the things that I have mixed feelings about is right now, in old growth forests, for example, in New York, hemlocks are being treated with pesticides, with neonicotinoids, to help them survive, and it works. So if you're in an old growth forest, you have a 300-year-old hemlock. Somebody, somebody that works for the state may be adding pesticides to the base of that tree so they're taken up and so they can survive. I think that is a fine short-term strategy, but I don't think I can live with that for more than 10, 20 years in only the most precious places. We don't want to put those pesticides in the environment, and it's just it's cost prohibitive to really do it more broadly. So,
and building on that, somebody said, could you explain the role of any of the Cornell Butterfly House in Suffolk County in Long Island and the butterfly collection at Cornell?
I'm not aware of the house in Suffolk County. I mean, there are butterfly houses all around that are used educationally. I think that there's kind of two flavors of butterfly houses. One is where they import chrysalids typically, and then they let them emerge in the butterfly house, and they kind of they're typically tropical or from other places, so we don't really let them out of the butterfly houses. And then there are some butterfly houses that are really growing and releasing in the houses more native species. And both approaches are fine from my perspective. I would say the biggest role they play is in education, I would say. Exposing kids and other people to the life cycle, the diversity, and occasionally researchers are using butterfly houses for their own projects in some ways. So
The Smithsonian has a big one for children to walk through with
super.
adults, luckily, so we get to see it too. But
In Washington, D.C. or
yes,
yeah,
Washington, D.C. Yeah, and then there's a lot of research lately on how plants who are in distress can vocalize that, and that apparently the insects and the like that feed on them or deposit their larvae there will avoid them
yes,
because of concerns about their health and well-being. Can you comment on that?
absolutely. Yeah, I mean, plants, don't have a central nervous system, but they are very, very responsive to the environment in general. I mean, people know that sunflowers, change where they're facing 180 degrees. Typically, in the morning they face the sun, and they're called sunflowers because they face the sun in the east, and they rotate each day. So what you're talking about is an immune-like reaction. Plants don't have immune systems in the same way that animals do, but they have immune-like reactions where when a disease starts to germinate, a spore starts to germinate, or a caterpillar starts to feed, the plants are often producing toxic compounds, initially very localized, just like you said. And that is a defensive strategy on the part of the plants. One of the classic places we see that this time of year, there's a lot of aspen and aspen leaves on the ground. They turn yellow and then they fall. and they get a little leaf miner, that a little insect that lays its eggs in the leaves. And one of the things that the aspen leaves do is that the trees do is they drop the leaves
Mhm.
with the leaf miners. So that is a bold, localized reaction. It probably only is going to happen if the leaf was, going to fall anyways in 3 weeks. The plant may shed that leaf early.
Right.
It's lost some photosynthetic ability, but it's also rid itself of a pest. Maybe it's killed the pest.
Mhm.
So, many of the compounds that we enjoy in our daily lives, whether it's the spice from a pepper or the caffeine from a coffee bean, those have evolved by natural selection to ward off pests. And often when pests start feeding on the plant, uh, the the plant produces more of those compounds.
Mhm. And another question is, can you talk about the role of keystone species in maintaining biodiversity?
Certainly. Um, so a keystone species is any species that has a disproportionately large impact on the ecosystem. And
Mhm.
it's typically disproportionate to its biomass. So, the classic example is sea stars. There's often predators in various systems. Sea stars in the intertidal zone at the oceans are predators.
Mhm.
And often with a little bit, even though there are not very many sea stars around, with a little bit of feeding that they do, they create an opportunity for more species to exist there. They kind of suppress competitively dominant species.
Mhm.
So, keystone species, it's a concept that's very important in ecology.
Mhm.
And most ecosystems have some species which play some keystone role.
Mhm.
They're not always predators. They may be other organisms.
Mhm.
Ants are an example where they play a lot of roles in most ecosystems. We don't want them in our houses. Maybe we brush them off if they're climbing onto our arms. But each ant has a relatively small mass in the community, is small, but they do a lot of things. They're moving around soil, they're moving around seeds, they're working with aphids, they're eating other organisms. So, yeah,
Ah, about monarchs, another question.
yeah.
Can you comment on monarch butterfly migration from Mexico to the US?
Well,
That's
sure.
several thousand miles, right?
Yeah, well, the big migration is in the fall, what we're experiencing right now, in the sense that individual butterflies will go from someplace like southern Ontario or New York or Michigan. Individual butterflies make the journey, the 3,000-mile journey themselves to Mexico.
Mhm.
Those same butterflies then wait there for about 3 months. Those same individuals, they weigh like this amount of a paperclip. They then
Mhm.
will migrate back to Texas and the Gulf states around there. So to me, the return migration in spring from Texas to the Northeast, that typically involves 3 generations. So
Mm.
those, in the annual cycle of the monarchs, there's 4 generations.
Mhm.
And let's say the first one begins in March, Texas to Indiana. The second generation might be Indiana to Michigan. And then the third generation either hangs around Michigan or it might go further into Ontario.
Mhm.
But then the last generation, which becomes a butterfly in August or in early September, it's the one where the individual butterflies not only live for 8 months, but they're traveling 3,000 miles. They're then waiting for 3 months, and then they're flying back to Texas. That's the sort of magic generation. The
Yeah.
other three are kind of living a month each, and they're kind of doing a little bit of movement.
You might have mentioned this, but how long does it take them to migrate from Mexico to the US?
Well, in the southern
I mean, if they're
migration,
only 8 months in their last generation, isn't it most of that?
yeah, so they travel 30 to 50 miles a day when they're in
Wow.
migratory mode.
Mhm.
But you have to realize, monarchs aren't, and birds aren't doing this either. Monarchs aren't using powered flight to propel themselves 3,000 miles. They are using wind currents. Like many of the birds that people love,
Mhm.
they will go up almost a kilometer using a thermal, basically a tube of warm
Oh,
air. The monarch
okay.
butterfly will go up about a kilometer and then
Mhm.
mostly sail down, taking advantage of wind currents. So, uh, when a colleague of mine did the calculation, they said if a monarch butterfly had to use powered flight, uh, uh, after 11 hours, it would be basically mostly depleted of energy. It's a small insect with a small amount of energy reserves. Every afternoon they do drink nectar and they fuel up a little bit,
Mhm.
but they're really taking advantage of wind and thermals and gliding.
And are they like birds affected by city lights?
Absolutely. Um, that's I have a PhD student, sort of relevant to talk about a PhD student, outstanding student, Hannah Gerholt. She's in her fourth year of her PhD, and her whole dissertation is on the impact of light at night on monarch caterpillar development and butterflies.
Mhm.
And we're finding some very interesting things already.
Mhm.
Um, and it's pretty frustrating. In my town, they installed very bright LED streetlights next to my house.
Mhm.
And I called them. I said, "Hey, can you dim them a little bit?" And they say, "Well, they are dimmable. They are dimmable, but we're not offering that service." And
Hmm.
so, all night, there they are. And you can imagine my yard. There's plenty of milkweeds growing in my yard. um, and so, yeah, I'd say we don't yet know how big of an issue it is, but it
Mhm.
causes them to behave differently at night. It causes them to change their growth pattern,
Mhm.
changes how much toxins they have in their body. We're beginning to study whether it affects their ability to migrate south. Uh, so, yeah, artificial
Is
light
it
at night.
possible to come up with ways to mitigate their problems with it? Like with birds, I think they're coming up with different glass coatings and the like, trying to.
Yes, well, absolutely. I think that's, I would guess there's all the simple things and then the more technical things. So, the first thing I would ask is, do we need lights on all hours of darkness in all places? And even though LEDs use a little bit less energy or substantially less energy, it's still energy. So I would say there must be places, in my neighborhood, between midnight and 5 in the morning, we don't need the street lights on.
Mhm.
Or we need every other one on or something,
Or
that
maybe a lower brightness or something.
lower brightness. And at least in Ithaca, each street light now is numbered and is controllable by a computer,
Mhm.
in the mayor's office or wherever. And so I think you know, I don't think it'd be asking for too much. But then there's what you said. There's different colors of light
Mhm.
that are more or less visible to us, but are also more or less harmful to biodiversity. And they're the coatings, etc. So that's work to be done.
And from watching some of the videos, some of the YouTube videos, I heard that your students, your scholars, have great opinions of you. Very approachable, fascinating lectures, very smart. Our guests here are finding the same thing, and they're really clamoring. How did you decide to become a scientist? I want to learn a bit more about you.
Oh, well, who knows why we take the paths. Here's my reconstruction. I mean, my parents were, I'll call them outdoors people. Not, we took our vacations camping. We spent the weekends on the Jersey Shore.
Hmm.
Um, and I would say that probably led me to a general interest in ecology.
Hmm.
Um, I was an undergraduate student at the University of Pennsylvania, and well, I guess you're getting the whole story. The deal I made with my parents was that as long as I took some science and math classes, I could study whatever I wanted.
Good for them,
Yeah, it's the
in my
classic.
opinion.
Yeah, I think of it as the immigrant syndrome, in that my parents came from India, and they sort of uh, they wanted there to be something secure in my future, and so so I took a biology class, and you guys will like this. we had a little book that rated the professors, right? And I said, if I have to take a biology class, I'm going to take the one where the students had rated that professor as coming late to class and leaving early. And
Very
so I took that.
practical.
Yeah. And the other thing is the class was dubbed Darkness at Noon because it was at noon and the professor would show slides. And so you would enter the lecture hall, the lights would go down. It was a slideshow, and he would come a little late and leave a little early. And but in the end, what he did was he told stories of the way organisms interacted with the environment and ways in which biodiversity was organized. And I found that fascinating. I didn't, sort of, my first inclination was, well, maybe I should be an environmental lawyer. I could kind of contribute to environment, but sort of satisfy. But as things go, I took a class in environmental law, but it was sort of on the right side of where I wanted to make a contribution, but I wanted to get my hands dirty, I guess is what. And so I had a lot of support in my life, both my parents, instructors, friends that
ARCS.
yeah, that sort of gave me the encouragement. I swam with a group of people just for exercise in the evenings, and I was telling somebody about my dilemma and how and the person said to me, like, used to listen to me and whatever my stories are, and he said, well, you see that light on in that building, that university building, that's going to be your lab. And I said, what do you mean? He said, you love this enough that you can do it. And I think that that's still true, despite all the cuts and so forth, for the students that are lucky enough to find what they think might be a passion. You know, after dinner, if you find yourself still interested in talking about that history lecture that you heard in the morning, or you want to learn more, I feel like when we're interested in something to the point where it gives us energy after hours, it's a good sign in terms of giving it a try and fueling it. And I'd say I've been fortunate enough to do that.
Well, I have to say thank you very much for your contributions to science. Thank you for your contributions to the scholars in general for mentoring them, bringing them along. And thank you very much for participating in this ARCS Forward session. I know that everybody has found it very interesting, and you've definitely had an impressive career. And I'd like to say that ARCS Foundation is proud to count you as one of our scholars, and we're very, very pleased to welcome you to our Alumni Hall of Fame. And to everybody who attended the session, these are the kind of impressive scholars that each of the 15 chapters of ARCS Foundation supports. And ARCS awards make huge impact on young scientists. The unrestricted financial support and encouragement that ARCS Foundation provides is essential in assisting these young scientists to complete their education and continue on to make their mark on the world. To everyone who joined us this afternoon, thank you for tuning in. We will send out a link to the recording for you to share with others. You will also receive a short survey. We really do use the survey info to design our sessions, so we hope you'll return the surveys. In the survey, also, please let us know if there's a topic of interest to you, and maybe also indicate if you'd like to donate to ARCS Foundation and or be a sponsor of a future ARCS Forward session. Again, Anurag, thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Take care. Bye.